I don't remember exactly when the doubts first crept in. Maybe it was during one of those late nights at the office when Diane, my wife, texted that she'd be working late again. Or maybe it was the subtle shift in her demeanor. The way her smile seemed less genuine, her hugs just a little colder. Diane and I had been married for 9 years. She was my partner in everything: life, love, and business. Together, we had built a thriving marketing agency, our shared dream realized through long nights and unwavering teamwork. At least, that's what I thought. It was a Thursday evening when the first real crack appeared. I came home early from a client meeting, expecting to surprise Diane with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. Her car was in the driveway, and the faint glow of the living room light spilled onto the front porch. I stepped inside, ready to call out her name, when I heard it, her laughter. It was soft, almost musical, the kind of laugh that used to be reserved just for me. But this time, it wasn't. It wasn't me who made her laugh. Curiosity overpowered me as I moved toward the sound. The door to her home office was ajar, and I could see her silhouette framed by the desk lamp. Across from her, leaning back in a chair with an ease that felt almost territorial, was Ben. Ben, my business partner, the guy I'd brought in when the agency started to take off, and we needed another set of hands to manage the workload. My first reaction was relief. Just Ben. They were probably talking shop, I told myself. I was about to step in when Diane reached across the desk, her fingers grazing his arm. It was fleeting, subtle enough that someone who wasn't looking for it might have missed it. But I saw it. I felt it. I left the food on the kitchen counter and slipped out before either of them noticed me. My chest felt tight, my thoughts swirling in a chaotic mess of denial and suspicion. They couldn't be, could they? That night, I lay awake beside Diane, listening to her even breathing, wondering if I was imagining things. Was I paranoid? Overthinking? She rolled over in her sleep, her arm draping over my chest like it always did, and I told myself I was being ridiculous. But once the seed of doubt is planted, it's hard to uproot. The next day at the office, I watched them. Not obviously, of course, just little glances here and there. The way Diane's face lit up when Ben walked into the room. The way Ben lingered near her desk longer than seemed necessary. The way their conversations dipped just slightly when I entered the room, like I'd interrupted something. It didn't take long for my mind to start piecing together the moments I'd previously brushed off as coincidence. The impromptu business trips they'd taken to meet with clients. The late nights at the office. The inside jokes I was always just outside of. By the end of the week, I was no longer questioning whether something was happening. I was questioning how far it had gone, and what I was going to do about it. By Saturday morning, my mind was a storm of questions. Did Diane and Ben think I wouldn't notice? Were they laughing at me behind my back? Was this some twisted betrayal they'd planned while I was busy keeping our business afloat? I needed answers. Diane spent the morning out running errands, which left me alone with my thoughts. My mind cycled through every interaction, every shared glance between them, every excuse she'd made over the last few months. I couldn't let my suspicions fester any longer. I had to know the truth. I started with Diane's phone. She had left it charging on the nightstand, and while it felt wrong to snoop, the growing knot in my stomach overpowered any reservations. Her password was still the same. Our wedding anniversary. That small detail almost made me laugh bitterly. The same code she had for years, the one she'd never changed. Did she even care if I found out? The messages were innocuous at first, threads with friends, reminders, and notes from clients. But when I opened the chat with Ben, the casual tone took on a darker edge. The texts weren't overtly damning, but there was something in the way they bantered, the way she replied faster to him than to anyone else. Late night again? Yeah, another client deadline. You around? Always for you. Want to talk it over in person? You know I do. I clenched the phone tighter as I scrolled. The exchanges weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The implication was there, laced in between every carefully worded text. And then I saw it. A location pin dropped just 3 nights ago. A hotel downtown. My stomach dropped. I put the phone back and sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the floor. This wasn't a coincidence. My wife and my business partner, the two people I trusted most in the world, were meeting in secret. And if they'd gone as far as to book a hotel, then this wasn't just an emotional affair. It was real. That afternoon, Diane came home as if nothing had changed. She breezed through the door, bags in hand, a smile plastered on her face. "I got your favorite coffee," she chirped, holding up a cup as though it was some sort of peace offering. I nodded, forcing a smile, but every movement felt mechanical, every word a struggle. Later, while she was busy unpacking groceries, I made my next move. Ben and I shared access to the company's email and scheduling system. It wasn't unusual for us to check each other's calendars to coordinate meetings or keep track of shared tasks. Logging in, I scanned for anything that might confirm my suspicions. And there it was, a 2-hour meeting blocked off under an alias, a name I didn't recognize. The timestamp matched the location pin from Diane's phone. My heart pounded as I opened the details. It was vague, just an address and a cryptic note. "Discuss expansion project?" Rage bubbled to the surface. Expansion project? That's what they were calling it now? I logged out, my mind racing. It was one thing to suspect, another to see it all laid out so blatantly. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. But I couldn't confront them yet. Not without more evidence. I needed to be sure. I needed to catch them in the act. That evening, Diane suggested we go out to dinner. Her voice was sweet, her smile warm, but all I could see was the shadow of deceit lingering behind her eyes. I agreed, even managed to laugh at her jokes, but inside I was seething. I was playing along, biding my time, waiting for the right moment. As we clinked glasses over plates of overpriced pasta, she reached across the table to take my hand. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her tone laced with concern. "Everything okay?" I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to see the woman I had married, the woman I had loved and trusted with everything I had. But all I could see was someone I didn't recognize, a stranger wearing the face of my wife. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just work stress. You know how it is." She nodded, squeezing my hand. "We should plan a weekend getaway soon," she suggested. "Just the two of us. To reconnect." The audacity of her words nearly made me laugh out loud. Reconnect? While she was sneaking off to hotels with Ben, I played along, nodding enthusiastically. "That sounds perfect," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Let's talk about it more this week." Diane smiled, her eyes lighting up with what I could only assume was relief. She thought she had me fooled, but she didn't realize I was already one step ahead. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already spinning with plans. I wasn't a naturally vengeful person, but the betrayal gnawed at me in ways I couldn't ignore. Diane and Ben thought they were clever, that their little charade was untouchable. It was time to show them just how wrong they were. The first step was hiring a private investigator. I had no experience with this sort of thing, but after some searching, I found a well-reviewed agency that specialized in uncovering infidelity. The investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Marcy, listened patiently as I outlined what I knew so far. She didn't ask unnecessary questions or judge me. She simply nodded and said, "Leave it to me." Marcy's confidence was both reassuring and unnerving. "How long do you think it'll take?" I asked. "Not long," she replied. "If they're as careless as you say, I'll have everything you need in a week, maybe less." I hoped she was right. I didn't think I could endure much longer, pretending everything was fine while my wife and my business partner continued their betrayal. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work. It wasn't easy. Every time I saw Ben at the office, I had to fight the urge to confront him. He acted completely normal, cracking jokes, discussing clients, and occasionally texting. Probably Diane, though I had no proof. The sheer audacity of his behavior only fueled my resolve. Diane, too, carried on as if nothing had changed. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still curled up beside me on the couch at night. But now, every gesture felt calculated, like she was playing a role in a drama I wasn't supposed to know about. On Wednesday, Marcy called with an update. "I followed them last night," she said, her tone brisk and professional. "They met at the Marriott downtown. I got photos of them entering a room together, and they didn't leave until morning." My stomach dropped. Hearing the confirmation, even though I'd already suspected it, hit me like a punch to the gut. "Send me everything," I said, my voice tight. When the photos arrived, I opened the file with shaking hands. There they were, Diane and Ben, walking into the hotel lobby together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. In one shot, Ben's hand rested on her lower back, an intimacy that turned my stomach. This wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated, cold. That evening, I kept my composure as Diane arrived home. She breezed through the door with her usual air of nonchalance, kissed me on the cheek, and started telling me about her day. I nodded along, my responses automatic, while my mind churned with plans. "By the way," she said casually as we sat down to dinner, "Ben and I have a client meeting tomorrow evening. It might run late, so don't wait up." I nearly choked on my food. The gall of her, to sit there and lie to my face while planning yet another rendezvous with him. "No problem," I said, forcing a smile. "Work comes first." She smiled back, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Thanks for understanding." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I reviewed every piece of evidence Marcy had gathered, each photo a stark reminder of the life Diane and Ben had built behind my back. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. Confronting them outright wasn't enough. I needed to hit them where it hurt. At the office, I called an emergency meeting with our attorney and our accountant. On paper, Ben and I were equal partners in the agency, but I'd always been the one who handled the finances. That detail was about to become very important. As I outlined my concerns to the attorney, he nodded grimly. "If you suspect Ben is engaging in behavior that could harm the company's reputation, you have grounds to dissolve the partnership. But you'll need solid proof." "I've got proof," I said, showing him the photos Marcy had taken. "And there's more where that came from." The accountant chimed in. "It might be worth freezing any discretionary spending until this is sorted. If things escalate, you don't want him siphoning funds." I nodded. "Do it." By the end of the day, the groundwork was laid. Diane and Ben thought they were in control, but they had no idea the walls were starting to close in around them. That night, Diane left for her meeting. I watched from the window as her car disappeared down the street, my emotions a tangled mix of anger and anticipation. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end, for both of them. The next day was one of the longest of my life. I sat at my desk, pretending to work while my mind raced with the details of my plan. Diane and Ben's web of lies was unraveling faster than I could have hoped, and all I needed now was the final piece to seal their fate. Around noon, Marcy called. "I've got what you're looking for," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They met again last night, same hotel, same routine. I also recorded some of their conversation in the lobby. It's explicit." "Send it over," I said, my pulse quickening. "I'll need everything." When the file arrived, I hesitated before opening it. Part of me didn't want to hear the confirmation, to have their betrayal spoken aloud. But the other part, the part that needed closure, pushed forward. With headphones on, I listened to the recording. It was worse than I'd imagined. Their voices were muffled but unmistakable. Diane's laughter, Ben's low murmurs, the intimate way they spoke to each other. They joked about how easy it was to keep their affair hidden, how naive they thought I was. Ben even suggested they could eventually run the company together without me, a notion Diane didn't exactly reject. I stopped the recording halfway through, unable to listen any longer. My hands shook as I forwarded the files to my attorney. "This is it," I typed. "Make it count." The rest of the day was a blur. Ben acted as though everything was normal, joking with the staff, stopping by my office to discuss upcoming projects. I smiled through gritted teeth, knowing it was the last time I'd have to endure his presence without action. Diane, too, was her usual self when I got home that evening, chatting about mundane details as though nothing had changed. But everything had. The next morning, I put the plan in motion. First, I met with our attorney to finalize the paperwork for dissolving the partnership. The evidence Marcy had gathered was more than enough to justify the decision. Ben's actions weren't just a betrayal of trust. They were a potential liability to the company's reputation. With my attorney's help, I secured an injunction preventing Ben from accessing company funds or making decisions on our behalf. Next, I called an emergency board meeting. Diane had no idea it was happening, and Ben was conveniently unavailable. By the time the meeting concluded, I had full support from the board to move forward with the dissolution. Ben's position was officially suspended pending review, and my control over the company was solidified. The final step was personal. That evening, I told Diane we needed to talk. We sat across from each other at the dining room table, the same table where we'd shared countless meals, laughed over inside jokes, and made plans for our future. Now, It felt like a battleground. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I slid a manila envelope across the table. "Open it." Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the contents: photos, transcripts of conversations, and a copy of the injunction against Ben. Her face paled as she flipped through the pages, her composure cracking with each new piece of evidence. Where did you get this?" she stammered. "That doesn't matter," I said, my tone cold. "What matters is that I know. About you and Ben. About the lies, the hotels, everything." Her eyes welled with tears, but I didn't feel sympathy. "Not this time." "I can explain," she began, her voice shaky. "No," I said sharply. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify what you've done. This isn't a conversation, Diane. This is a reckoning." She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I remained unmoved. "I trusted you," I continued. "I built a life with you, and you threw it away. For what? For him?" "It wasn't like that," she whispered, her words almost inaudible. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice rising. "And now you're going to face the consequences." I stood, my resolve hardening as I looked down at her. "I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow. My attorney will be in touch. Pack your things, Diane. I want you out of this house by the end of the week." She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face a mask of desperation. "Please, Luke," she begged. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Start over." "No," I said, cutting her off. "There's no starting over. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I walked away, leaving her at the table with the evidence of her betrayal scattered around her. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. The storm was far from over, but the path ahead was clear. Diane and Ben had underestimated me, and now they would learn the hard way that some mistakes are irreparable. The day after my confrontation with Diane, I was back at the office early. My attorney had advised me to act quickly and decisively. Diane's betrayal was personal, but Ben's actions went beyond that. They threatened everything I had built. It was time to address the second half of this twisted equation. By mid-morning, Ben strolled into the office, his usual confident demeanor on full display. He greeted everyone warmly, laughing and shaking hands as if he owned the place. Watching him, I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my composure. I needed this confrontation to play out on my terms. "Ben," I called from my office door. "Can I see you for a minute?" He glanced over, a faint smirk on his face. "Of course, boss," he said, sauntering over. The smugness in his tone made my blood boil, but I stayed calm. As soon as the door closed behind him, I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Have a seat." Ben dropped into the chair, stretching out like he didn't have a care in the world. "What's up?" I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I slid a folder across the desk. "Open it." He frowned, leaning forward to flip the folder open. His eyes scanned the contents: photos of him and Diane entering the hotel, transcripts of their conversations, a copy of the injunction against him. I watched as the smirk fell from his face, replaced by a look of dawning horror. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "You tell me," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It looks like a pretty clear-cut case of betrayal to me." Ben's eyes darted back to the photos, then up to meet mine. "This isn't what it looks like," he said quickly. "I can explain." "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "I'm not interested in your excuses. You've already said enough in those recordings." His face turned pale. "Recordings?" he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned forward, my gaze locked on his. "Did you really think you could get away with this? Sleeping with my wife? Scheming behind my back? Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Ben opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked truly afraid. "I trusted you," I continued, my voice cold. "I brought you into this company, gave you opportunities you never would have had on your own. And this is how you repay me?" "It wasn't like that," he stammered, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "Luke, I swear." "Stop lying," I said sharply. "I've got all the proof I need. You've been suspended from your position effective immediately, and the board has already approved the dissolution of our partnership. You're done here." Ben's eyes widened in panic. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. This company is as much mine as it is yours. Not anymore, I said. You forfeited your place here the moment you decided to betray me. Pack your things and get out. He stood, his face red with anger. You're making a mistake, Luke, he said, his tone threatening. You'll regret this. I stood as well, matching his glare. The only mistake I made was trusting you. Now get out of my office. Ben hesitated for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out. I watched as he marched through the office, his presence like a dark cloud over the room. The staff glanced at each other, confused and uneasy, but no one dared to speak. Once he was gone, I sat back down, the tension in my chest slowly easing. It was done. The confrontation I had dreaded for weeks was over, and I had come out on top. But as satisfying as it was to see Ben finally face the consequences of his actions, I knew the fight wasn't over yet. There were still legal battles to navigate, still loose ends to tie up. And then there was Diane. I had kicked her out of the house, but she wasn't going to disappear quietly. For now, though, I allowed myself a moment of quiet triumph. I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming my life, and I wasn't about to stop now. In the days following Ben's departure, the office was a whirlwind of whispers and tension. Everyone knew something had happened, but no one dared ask me directly. I kept my head down, focusing on damage control. Clients needed reassurance, employees needed direction, and the company needed to recover from the storm Ben had left in his wake. Meanwhile, Diane's departure from the house was less smooth. True to form, she tried to argue her way back in, showing up at the house unannounced a day after our confrontation. I just need a chance to explain, she said, standing on the front porch, her eyes red and puffy. She wore the same jacket she always did when she wanted to seem vulnerable, like this was some sad misunderstanding and not a deliberate betrayal. There's nothing to explain, I said, blocking the doorway. I've seen enough. This isn't your home anymore. Go. Luke, please, she begged, her voice trembling. We've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away over a mistake. A mistake? I said, incredulous. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or missing a date night. This was calculated, Diane. Repeated. You made choices, and now you're living with the consequences. Her face crumpled, but I didn't budge. You can get your things when I'm not here, I said firmly. But you're not staying. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered. Try Ben, I said coldly before shutting the door in her face. It was harsh, but I didn't care. The woman who stood on my porch wasn't the Diane I had married. She was a stranger who had trampled on everything we'd built together, and I had no room left for sympathy. The fallout from Diane and Ben's affair reached farther than I anticipated. Word spread quickly through our professional network, thanks in no small part to mutual acquaintances who had seen or heard enough to start piecing things together. I hadn't intended for the story to become public, but once it did, the reactions were swift. Some clients quietly distanced themselves from Ben's camp, unsure of his future in the industry. Others, particularly those who had worked closely with me, reached out with support. The same couldn't be said for Diane. Once a respected name in her field, her reputation took a nosedive as whispers of the affair began to circulate. Her work friends, many of whom were also mine, started pulling back. Loyalty only stretched so far when betrayal was involved. But the most unexpected fallout came from a single phone call I received a week after I filed for divorce. Look, it's Marcy, my private investigator said, her tone businesslike but tinged with something else, concern, maybe. There's something you need to see. Can we meet? When we sat down in her office later that day, she slid another folder across the desk. This wasn't part of the original scope, but I came across it during my follow-up on Ben. I thought you should know. I opened the folder, my stomach tightening as I scanned the contents. Bank statements, wire transfers, expense receipts, all linked to Ben. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then it clicked. He'd been siphoning money from the company. Is this real? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Unfortunately, yes, Marcy said. He's been moving funds into an offshore account for months. Based on these numbers, it's significant. The betrayal felt like a second blow to the chest. It wasn't enough for him to go after my wife. He'd been stealing from me, too. The company I had poured my heart and soul into, the legacy I had worked so hard to build, was being gutted from the inside. Can we prove this? I asked, the anger rising again. Absolutely, Marcy said. You already have the legal advantage with the injunction. With this evidence, you could pursue criminal charges. I nodded, the gears in my mind already turning. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. By the end of the week, I had added a new layer to the legal battle. My attorney filed a lawsuit against Ben for embezzlement, backed by Marcy's airtight evidence. The court issued a freeze on his accounts while the investigation proceeded, and I felt the first real sense of power returning to my life. Diane, meanwhile, tried to reach out multiple times. Texts, calls, even emails, each one more desperate than the last. She alternated between apologizing profusely and begging for another chance to furious accusations that I was ruining her life. I didn't respond to any of them. The Diane I loved was gone, and nothing she said now could change what had happened. My focus was on rebuilding, on reclaiming what she and Ben had tried to take from me. One evening, as I sat in the now quiet house, I realized something. For the first time in months, I wasn't consumed by anger or grief. There was still pain, yes, but it wasn't the sharp, gut-wrenching kind anymore. It was quieter, more manageable, a scar instead of an open wound. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, and I was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers, emotional challenges, and moments of unexpected clarity. The lawsuit against Ben gained traction quickly, thanks to the overwhelming evidence Marcy had gathered. He tried to play it off as a misunderstanding, a mistake in accounting, but the paper trail didn't lie. Every dollar he had stolen was documented, every transfer meticulously tracked. In the business world, reputation is everything. The revelation of Ben's embezzlement wasn't just a legal nightmare for him. It was a death sentence for his career. Clients who had stayed neutral during the initial fallout now cut ties, unwilling to associate with someone so blatantly dishonest. He became a pariah almost overnight, his charm and connections no longer enough to save him. But Ben wasn't the only one facing consequences. Diane's reputation continued to crumble, both personally and professionally. Her pleas for forgiveness turned into venomous messages when she realized I wasn't going to respond. She blamed me for everything. For her ruined career, her lost friends, her financial struggles. "You've destroyed my life, Luke," she wrote in one particularly scathing email. "I made a mistake, but you've taken it too far. Are you happy now?" I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The lawsuit wasn't the only battle I was fighting. The divorce proceedings were equally contentious, with Diane demanding more than she was entitled to. She claimed she deserved half of everything. The house, the business, even the assets I had carefully protected. My attorney, however, was relentless. The evidence of her affair and the financial safeguards I had put in place ensured that she left with far less than she had hoped. By the time the divorce was finalized, Diane was left with a modest settlement and no claim to the business. It was a clean break, exactly what I needed to move forward. And move forward I did. With Ben out of the picture, the company began to stabilize. Clients who had been wary of the scandal returned, reassured by the transparency and leadership I demonstrated during the crisis. The employees who stayed were loyal and hardworking, grateful to see the company weather the storm. I poured myself into the business, working longer hours and taking on more responsibilities. But it wasn't just about work, it was about rebuilding, reclaiming my life, proving to myself that I could survive this betrayal and come out stronger. One evening, months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected message. It was from Marcy, my private investigator. "Luke," she wrote, "I thought you'd want to know. Ben's been charged with embezzlement. Trial starts next month. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at the message for a long time, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest. Satisfaction, relief, closure. Ben's downfall was finally complete, and though it didn't erase what he had done, it felt like justice. The next morning, I received another surprise. This time, it was a letter from Diane. Not an email or a text, a handwritten letter delivered to my office. "Luke," it began, "I know you probably won't read this, and even if you do, I doubt you'll believe me. But I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. For everything. For lying to you. For betraying you. For breaking the trust we built over so many years. I don't expect your forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I'll always regret what I did. You were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away for something that didn't matter. For someone who didn't matter. I hope you can find happiness again. You deserve it more than anyone I know. Diane. I folded the letter and set it aside, unsure how to feel. Her words felt genuine, but they didn't change the past. They didn't erase the pain or the betrayal. All they did was confirm what I already knew. That Diane was no longer a part of my life, and I had no desire to let her back in. As the days turned into weeks, the chaos began to fade. The company was thriving again. My personal life was finding balance, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the weight of a marriage that had become a prison. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my newly purchased home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The betrayal had scarred me, yes, but it hadn't broken me. And for the first time in a long time, I was at peace. Life has a strange way of rebuilding itself when you least expect it. By the time the dust had fully settled, I felt like a different person. Stronger, sharper, more focused. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons about trust, resilience, and the importance of knowing your worth. The company was flourishing. With Ben gone, there were no more backdoor schemes or hidden agendas. The staff rallied around me, eager to move forward and leave the scandal behind. We brought in new clients, launched ambitious projects, and regained our reputation as a leader in the industry. Each small victory felt like a step toward redemption, not just for the business, but for myself. On the personal front, I had finally moved into my new home. It was nothing like the house Diane and I had shared. No remnants of the life we had built together. It was entirely mine, a blank canvas waiting for me to fill it with memories of a new chapter. One evening, as I unpacked a box of old books, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from a familiar name, Sarah, an old friend from college. We drifted apart over the years, but she had reached out occasionally to check in. "Hey Luke," the message read. "I heard about everything that happened. I just wanted to say I'm sorry you had to go through that. If you ever want to catch up, let me know." I hesitated before replying. Reaching out to someone felt strange after months of focusing inward, but something about Sarah's message felt genuine. I typed a response, simple but sincere. "Thanks, Sarah. It's been a rough year, but I'm getting through it. Would love to catch up sometime." Her reply came almost immediately. "How about coffee this weekend?" Meeting Sarah felt like stepping back into a part of myself I had forgotten. She was warm, funny, and completely uninterested in the drama that had consumed my life for so long. We talked about everything: college memories, work, her new role as a nonprofit director. For the first time in months, I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing. Over the next few weeks, we met up regularly. Coffee turned into dinners, which turned into long walks by the lake. Sarah had a way of seeing the world that felt refreshing, unburdened by cynicism or bitterness. Being around her reminded me of the person I used to be before betrayal had hardened me. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You're different," she said. "Stronger. But there's still kindness in you, Luke. Don't let what happened change that." Her words stayed with me long after she left. For so long, I had been focused on survival, on rebuilding, that I hadn't stopped to think about who I wanted to be on the other side of it all. Months passed, and life began to feel normal again. Sarah and I grew closer, though we both took things slow, cautious not to rush into anything too quickly. I focused on the business, continued to grow as a leader, and even started exploring hobbies I had neglected during my marriage: photography, hiking, learning to play the guitar. One day, as I stood on a mountain trail, camera in hand, I realized just how far I had come. The man I was now wouldn't have recognized the man I had been a year ago. The pain was still there, a quiet echo in the background, but it no longer defined me. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, stronger and more intentional than ever before. Diane and Ben were long gone, their chapters in my story firmly closed. Ben's trial ended in a conviction, his career in ruins. Diane, as far as I knew, had moved to another city, trying to piece together the remnants of her life. I didn't wish them harm, but I didn't think about them often, either. They were shadows of a past I had left behind. As I packed up my camera and headed back down the trail, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The betrayal that had once consumed me was now just a part of my story, a chapter that had led me to where I was today. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't defined by what I had lost, but by what I had gained. A new life, a new beginning, and the unshakable knowledge that no matter what came next, I would be ready.